This is a short video about a German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, and his idea about something he calls the Übermensch, or in English that's the Overman. And I'd like to connect that to 3 Hollywood movies, which I think are kind of connected in some way. First of all, just a little bit about Nietzsche's idea. Nietzsche wrote a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra back in the latter half of the 19th century. I think it was 1885 something, and in that book he mentioned for the first time this idea of the Overman. The Overman for Nietzsche was his idea of an ideal person, perhaps a person that is way in the future from where we are, or perhaps it was an idea of a perfect or a better man that Nietzsche was trying to create for himself back in 1885. The Overman is someone who has changed their values. In other words, they don't keep the status quo, they don't follow the herd, they don't succumb to the religion of the time and the moral implications of the religion of the time. The idea of the Overman was pretty connected to the creative fields. Nietzsche was very into the arts. He felt very passionate about paintings, music, theatre, opera, and he felt that the artistic endeavours of a society were very important for the well-being of the society. He didn't feel that science and rationalism were going to cure all our ills, and he felt that the people in his time were small-minded. A lot of the people were small-minded. They followed the leader. He even worried about the education system of the time. He said it was very uniform. People were all coming out with the same ideas, and it was becoming very academic, and people were losing the ability to think for themselves. So this idea of a creative person who would think beyond the mediocrity, I suppose, of the time, someone who would create not just artistic endeavours but would create themselves. They would become a better person, they would have better values, they would be more adventurous, they would not just seek fame and fortune for its own sake. They wouldn't spend their time thinking that the objective of life is, let's say, a pension plan. They would be more daring in their endeavours. And they, these Overmen, through their influence and their thoughts and their creative ideas, would live on from generation to generation, because their ideas, in the form of literature or whatever, would outlive them. And that's what happened with Nietzsche himself. His own ideas are still very much in the public consciousness long after he himself has left. Now, the first movie that I'd like to talk about is the movie from the director Sergio Leone. It's a 1969 movie called Once Upon a Time in the West. This was one of the first movies I remember seeing as a kid. I saw it when I was about 7 or 8, and it stayed with me, and it's still one of my favourite movies. And I think the reason I'm mentioning this in the same in the same vein as Nietzsche's idea is because in this movie all the characters are very mythical. There's a great style that Sergio Leone has created. You could argue that by creating this movie, Sergio Leone himself has gone on and will go on from generation to generation with what he's done. So you could class him as an Overman. And the characters that litter this movie, although they're not necessarily good characters, a lot of them are bad characters, but the way they hold themselves, the way they move, there is something very mythical, there is something of antiquity about these characters. And I remember as a kid, the one thing that struck me is that none of these characters seem to have had any fear of death. And I'm just going to show you a little bit in a few minutes of some of these characters. They didn't seem to have any fear of the final duels, and you could say maybe that's bad acting, and if it was done by a more method type actor, they would have probably showed their fear. I know in the movie The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Eli Wallach, who is a method actor, he does show fear during that final gunfight between himself, Clint, and Lee Van Cleef. But I'm glad that they kept the duels, especially between the Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda duel, they kept the characters not showing any fear, because it comes off again as if they're mythical characters, and mythical in the same sense as to me anyway, as the Overman that Nietzsche talks about.
Morton once told me I could never be like him. Now I understand why. Wouldn't have bothered him knowing you were around somewhere alive.
So you found out you're not a businessman after all.
Just a man.
This is a great line by Charles Bronson talking about men, and he talks as if he's talking about another species. He doesn't talk as if he is one of the men. And again, that's another aspect of this movie, that these characters, they seem above and beyond the other characters, the people working on the railroad.
An ancient race. Other Mortons will be along, and they'll kill it off.
It don't matter to us. Nothing matters now, not the land, not the money, not the woman. I came here to see you. Because I know that now you'll tell me what you're after.
Only at the point of dying.
I know.
This is the next movie I wanted to look at, a Steve McQueen movie called Bullett. Nietzsche says, as regards the Overman, that the Overman would use his will to power, his creative skills, to inspire the thoughts of others creatively from generation to generation. In this way, the existence of the Overman would live on forever. And if there is ever an actor who has inspired not just actors but all kinds of people from generation to generation, it's this guy, Steve McQueen. And he is, for me anyway, one of my favourite movies is Bullett. And he, in this movie, again, he's got a very he's very stoic, and he comes across again to me like one of Nietzsche's characters. because of the way he handles himself in this movie, every scene with him and every piece of movement and every piece of dialogue is so economical, and he is so strong in himself, Steve McQueen, that he is someone that's accepting his fate completely and doesn't seem to have any internal conflict. And again, maybe a more method actor may not like that particular style. It may seem unreal, but I really like it because there is something slightly great about the character when it's played like this. So.
Oh, I nail him. I want him written off.
Do you let anything reach you? I mean, really reach you? Or are you so used to it by now that nothing really touches you? You're living in a sewer, Frank. Day after day. With you, living with violence is a way of life. Living with violence and death.
Now, what went wrong, Lieutenant?
Who else knew where he was?
What?
Who else knew where he was?
This scene is great because the Robert Vaughn character represents really the authority and the power. He is I think he's a senator, and he can do all kinds of things for Steve McQueen's career in this movie for Bullett. He really is he's Bullett's ticket to a very prosperous career, if you like. But the Bullett character really doesn't give a shit about that at all. I mean, he just looks straight through this guy, and he actually makes an enemy of him, which I always find that it's a very strong thing that he does. He won't be swayed from his course. He won't be intimidated, or he won't be bought by anybody. He really is. He's his own person.
What have you been implying?
Well, they knew where to look for him, and they used your name to get in.
Are you suggesting I disclosed his whereabouts?
You believe what you want. You work your side of the street, and I'll work mine.
So that's Bullett. And the last movie I wanted to just show here in connection with the Nietzsche's Overman theory is a different kind of movie. It's a comedy. Bill Murray. Bill Murray is one of these people who again seems to embody something very strange. He always comes across to me as somebody who is genuinely an outsider looking in at things. He never seems to be taking part in the movies he's in. He really seems to be on the outside looking in, and kind of vaguely amused by the trivialities of it all. There really hasn't been enough good movies for Bill Murray. I think he's such a unique character that I don't think anyone has really come up with the proper vehicle for him. But this movie, Groundhog Day, is probably the one he'll be remembered for. And in this movie, it's funny because he starts off as the opposite of the Overman. He starts off as the human, or very much human character with the big ego, who's got he's got ambitions of being promoted, and he's small-minded, he's narrow-minded, and he is the opposite of what Nietzsche would see as an ideal man. But as he relives the day over and over again, which is a great analogy because where we are kind of all reliving the same day over and over again, he does start to develop. He realizes a certain power, and he goes through a period of being the bad guy, like the Henry Fonda guy. But then he becomes an artist. Bill Murray. He learns language. He learns French literature. He learns to play the piano. The thing about the Overman theory is also it's a change, a psychological change. It's a change in thinking. It's learning to think differently. It's learning to think for yourself, and becoming independent of mind. And in this movie, Groundhog Day, I think that's what happens to the character. He has a big shift of attitude. His thinking changes, his attitude changes, and things seem to improve for him as he progresses throughout the movie.
Groundhog time.
1,000 people freezing their butts off waiting to worship a rat.
We could do whatever we want. He's discovering the possibilities
Don't you worry about cholesterol?
Why?
and living life like there's no tomorrow.
Phil Connors!
Ned! Because I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god.
Studied 19th century French poetry.
What a waste of time.
I studied 19th century French poetry.
La fille qui j'aimais là.
You speak French. What did you do today?
Oh, same old, same old.
Nietzsche would say the worst enemy you can meet will always be yourself. You lie in wait for yourself in caverns and forests. I think Nietzsche was very misunderstood, maybe still is. He's quite complicated, and I might sound odd, but I like reading people I don't always understand fully because there's a challenge in it. But when you find his affirmative stuff, he can be very encouraging and uplifting. I'm not really into the religious stuff. It was, I guess, very important during his time. It's not so now. But when he talks about artists and how to better yourself and how to be more positive, he is quite inspiring.